welcome to the Coaching Hour, December 2014. Let's see, 2001, 2014. This is the last show of the 13th year, I think, right, Brian?
Yeah.
We started 2001. You were on the first show, and you've been on every show ever since then. I don't know what that says about you or me, but maybe we're the two guys that keep passing the $50 check back and forth to each other. If you'll show up, I'll give you $50, okay?
In other words, we're washing each other's laundry.
Yeah, we just keep passing the same check back and forth to each other. So, anyway, welcome to all of you tonight. Bob Snowflake Shannon is going to talk to us a little bit tonight in a few minutes about how minor errors expedite learning. It's something he's been studying, and he's going to beep on here in just a minute, and I'm going to let him. But, who just beeped in?
Hi, Coach Rick Carter.
Hey, Ricochet. Glad to have you, buddy. But tonight, the main theme for tonight is we want to continue the discussion of what beginners really need to embrace deeply and work hardest at in order to optimize the amount of time it takes them to work their way up through the classes and get into master class. I think Shane was going to be on tonight, and Bob Shannon's going to be on. He's going to talk, as I said, about how minor errors expedite learning. So, Bob, if you're on, let me know. If not, we'll keep going.
I'm on.
You're on? Okay, good. I'm going to come to you in about 3 minutes.
Okay.
We'll talk about your research and your findings, and then we'll kind of throw it open and see what any or everybody else has got to talk about. I've got several things that have come out of a conversation between me and Vicki and several other shooters. I did something I've never done before. I used an analogy today that I've never used before, and as I was sharing it with Vicki, her eyes sparkled. Now, that's as far as I'm going with that. Okay. Shut up, Brian. I just shut up. It's something that just came to me out of the clear blue. And Shane, I was talking to Shane Warnick on the way, and I was telling him about it and what a cool soliloquy it ends up being. And he brought something that I hadn't even thought about out of it. And if he's here, I'll get him to share that with you tonight. So, but anyway, I covet all of your thoughts on what you learned as a beginner and what you wished you had spent more time on as a beginning shooter. The other thing that I'd like to know is how you settled on coming to see the two instructors that are probably maligned more by the top shooter instructors than any other people in the country. And trusting us with your future and your deepest, darkest secrets to help you get better at a crazy game called sporting clays. I think I shared with you a box pigeon shooter that came to me. I don't know how many years ago Mac came to me, but he just called me out of the clear blue, and he said, I want to spend 3 days with you. And I said, nobody can take 3 days of Gill Ash. And he said, I pay in cash up front. No refunds. And I said, when did you say you were going to be here? And he got here, and he gave me the cash for 3 days up front and brought his own ammo and wanted to pay for targets, and I wouldn't let him pay for the targets. And we started our journey that morning at 9 o'clock, and I said, how did you find me? And he said, do you realize how many people really hate you as an instructor? And I said, well, I know that I'm not well liked because they're jealous, but I didn't realize they hated me. And he said, everybody I asked, who is the instructor in the country that you hate the most, that were instructors? You were the first name off of their lips, and that's why I came to see you, because I figured you were better than all of them put together, because they hated you so much. So that began a relationship, a 3-day relationship that blossomed into a really good long-term relationship, and that old man is shot well, and I hear from him about every 6 months. And when people try to coach him, he just says, I ain't talking to anybody but Gil Ashley, just shut up. And he doesn't shoot anything but box pigeons. He loves it. He had 2 really close brushes with cancer. Got a lot of money, got several big companies that are running themselves, and he had a change on his outlook on life, and he's kind of living every day to its max and letting everything else take care of itself. So that said, I want to turn over the program to Bob Shannon for him to share some of the things that he's been discovering in his study about the small mistakes that we make, and then after he finishes or during his little dissertation, I may add a couple of things to add simply because we're beginning to realize if we can get shooters to quit trying to break the damn target and just fire the circuit and let us correct the little mistakes and mold their move, that we can get them where they want to be a lot faster. Does that have any validity, Bob?
Yeah, it does. So what I've been looking at is a couple of things that have been explored by a group in the bioengineering department at Johns Hopkins Medical School that became interested in performance, particularly looking at choking, but they then kind of branched out as they began to understand they had to know more about learning before they could really understand what choking was all about. So what they've looked at was some information that was previously out there that made researchers feel that the noise kind of errors that, or I should say the errors that we were seeing were considered to be noise in the background, and you wanted to avoid them. And what they said was, that's an assumption. We don't know what the answer to that is. So they started doing a series of experiments. And basically what they broke it down into as the results appeared is that there are 2 ways that new learners or people learning something brand new in motor movement go about the actual process of learning. And one of those is sensory proprioception, which is how do you feel? How do you feel the gun move and the like?
Now I got to ask a question simply because I've been dealing with a lot of people. Okay, were you in sync with that bird? Well, I felt like I was.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to know, did you see that you were moving the same speed as the bird? Now, are we talking about 2 different things here?
Yeah, well, that's the second half. And that's the ability to perceive errors in the process of what you're doing. So you've got to have the ability to have a good move, which is the proprioceptive part, and to be able to feel that synchronization, but you also have to be able to determine that it's not quite right. So sensory proprioception primarily involves an area of the brain in the back of the brain called the cerebellum, and it's also where you have your balance from and things like that. But the motor area that perceives motor error is actually in a much older part of the brain that then has connections to the processing centers in the upper part of the brain as well as the cerebellum. So it feeds information in multiple directions. It also happens to be the area that works more by inhibiting activities and therefore allows you to have smooth movement instead of jerky movement. It's also the area where we have a bunch of diseases such as Parkinson's disease comes out of this area, and the disease that Arlo Guthrie died from also comes out of this area from deterioration in the neurons in that area. So new motor learning can be categorized in 2 major processes. One is exploration, which is how do you begin to find out what this feels like, and the second part is exploitation. And the authors use a nice analogy, and that is that if you give a kid who's blindfolded a piece of wooden stick and tell him to knock the hell out of the piñata, the exploration part is finding the piñata. In other words, what's the first contact? And then once you've made first contact, the exploitation is how you change the motor movements once you've made your first contact to narrow down where the piñata is at any one point in time. So this has analogies that work for us when somebody's learning a new process. How does it feel to begin with? And once you get the feel down and the generalization, how do you begin to narrow it down by perceiving small incremental errors that you make, and the brain does corrections accordingly. Exploration is less well refined, as you can imagine, thinking of the piñata example, and the exploitation is usually much less wide swings, much more narrow interpretation of what's going on and adjustments. So part of this is always making sure that the new learner, or learning something new, even if you're not a new learner, learning something new, that you actually have a chance to make those mistakes and perceive the mistakes, and that you get accurate feedback about it. And these fellows did some interesting research. They had a process, which I'm not going to go into describing, but they actually, for some of the experimentees, gave an artificially wrong response to what they were doing. In other words, the information they got back as feedback was incorrect. And what they found was that the brain ignores eventually incorrect, but does a lot of mistakes in the process of waiting for that to happen. So once it perceives that it's getting incorrect feedback, and it will ignore that information and only zero in on the information that goes in the correct direction to get the results it's after. So from the perspective of a coach, it becomes pretty important that you give accurate feedback. That means you're not going to tell them too many times it's good work when indeed they're making mistakes. Just let them make the mistakes, and when they're making good corrections, then give them really good feedback at that point. The limits on this appear to be related to you learn faster if you go through this process of incremental error corrections for any new related activity in the future. There is some crossover into unrelated, but it is most effective in related. So going back to what we talked about last month, where we said random training, if you're going to do random training, you wouldn't say, well, we're going to do quartering targets for 25 shots, and then we're going to do really, really long, true crossers. You're better off for them learning if you just change the angle or change the speed or change the distance of the target you're approaching, which Gil and Vicki do quite frequently, and allow them to see those errors get adjusted for, and then come back to that previous target again and allow the brain to do the processing using the information from this old part of the brain called the basal ganglia. So it really has very important implications for how we teach new skills and how we learn new skills. You want to do them in random, but you don't want to do them too far afield from what you're trying to really zero in on.
Give me an example. For an example, you're an instructor, an experienced instructor, and if you have someone who's been a hunter their whole life and is swinging through the bird, or trying to swing through the bird and performing miserably at sporting clays, trying to get better at sporting clays, what would be one of the first things that you would evaluate about them?
I would evaluate.
I'm springing this on you without letting you know, but I just my brain wants to know.
Yeah, I would make sure that they're first of all their mount's consistent. So that would be one piece of information I'd like them to know about, and I might take them to a pattern board to do that, so they can see it. Their brain gets to see it. That the three shots are not in the same place. That they have been inconsistent, so they get that adjustment right away, and then we talk about how they're going to do that. In the same way that if I was taking them out, and I'm going to make this up, typical bird shot, a quartering shot from right, and they were missing it at 30 yards, the first step I might do is move them into 15 yards, and then I might well do exactly what you've done in the past, which is the next one is move them back to 35. Let them play around with that and see how the move feels differently each time, timing-wise and speed, so that they begin to put some parameters around this. They know the bird's there. They know that where they're going to go for it, but the difference each time allows their brain to see it in a different way, and by using that processing center and the error corrections, they're going to learn faster on the next quartering target you present them with. I got to throw this in. I said something today to the two students that Vicki got ready for me over the past Saturday and Sunday, and I'll get with that in just a minute. But I said something today to one of them
not that they were over-analytical, and not that anybody on the phone has ever been over-analytical about what they're trying to do. But I was trying to get them to make an error correction after they missed a target, trying to learn to stabilize the picture and let the bird come from a long way away. And I said, okay, what's the correction? And you could tell there was a long pause and there was a lot of thought. And I said, okay, stop. Both of you listen. When I ask you what the correction is, be less concerned about whether the correction is correct. The first thing that comes to your mind, say it and make that correction. If it's right, great. If it's not right, you've eliminated something, but be decisive about the correction and be much less lengthy and analytical, trying to not be wrong to be right. Now, when I got that across to them and they just started, what's the correction? Closer to the bird. What's the correction? Start sooner. What's the correction? Nose on the bird. When they began to start saying the first thing that came into their mind and they began to correct on it, if it was correct, they learned from it. But even if it wasn't correct, they learned that that wasn't correct, and they went to another one, and they began to correct themselves. How do I say this?
Much more efficiently
every time.
Much more efficiently.
Yeah, they begin to correct themselves more efficiently simply by not being hung up and worrying about being incorrect or trying to be too wrong. They just made a correction and went with it and looked at the result. And you could tell once they began to do this that the pressure of the situation, of learning something that was way out of their comfort zone, the pressure of that learning situation began to subside, and they began to not be as anal about trying to consciously plan everything they were doing. They just began to let it happen. And to me, it seemed that their brains picked it up much more quickly. The fact that I said, don't be as concerned about being correct with the correction, but be decisive, get it over with, fire the circuit again, and let's see what happens. And it was almost like they were experimenting with the corrections, and the simple experimentation with no expectation, let's see what happens, allowed them to learn what I was trying to get them to learn more quickly than I think it would have if they'd have been so anal and gotten conscious in all their corrections. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I actually saw you do that once at the 74 Ranch, and I think it was with Greg when he was just, for some strange reason, struggling with a quartering target with a little bit of slide. And you had him miss it 2 feet. You told him, miss it 2 feet behind, miss it 2 feet right, miss it 2 feet above, and then said, now shoot it.
Yeah, and he smashed it.
And he smashed 10 in a row right away.
Yeah.
But he had missed, I think, 15 or 20 at that point. And
But we become so anal trying to be so perfect as opposed to, and I think that's what the gist of what you're trying to share with us tonight, and that is it's less important whether you're right or wrong. It's more important to be decisive and get on with it and then evaluate the next move than it is to fret and ponder, I wonder what's the real reason. It just appears to me, I know that when I'm shooting, I've started shooting from the hip more. And when I'm shooting from the hip, I really don't care whether it's the right reason. I just come up with something after a missed target that I'm going to do on the next one that I think I can do better on. And it just seems as though, man, once I hit that groove, because I'm not trying to, or I'm not in the mindset of trying not to miss, I just want to get in sync with that bird. And when I'm in sync with that bird and I see the front of that bird and I pull the trigger and it blows up, it just leads to strings upon strings upon strings of broken targets from the hip at surprising distances that it just allows it. I guess what it does to me is it emboldens me to push people to quit thinking, just fire the circuit and let's evaluate it. If you'll just fire the circuit without trying to hit the bird, and let me or Vicki tell you what to change and help you change it and implement the change and fire it again, it seems that we're getting quicker more consistent, longer-lasting results that way than we are going through, a 20-minute dissertation of how this works and what you need to be doing, and because it seems as though we're alerting the conscious brain as opposed to dealing with the more feely, picturey, unconscious brain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. You need both elements to be able to do it, and neither one of those parts of your brain are really conscious parts.
Yeah. And I have to tell you, in some of the reading you've been sending me, it's really opening up my mind to the process that I've been looking at it as right brain, left brain, but it's not. It's both brains. It's just that one becomes submissive to the other in different parts of the plan and the shot. And it's the act of the analytical brain becoming submissive to the athletic brain that allows you to go in and replicate things at a high level. But you still have to have that analytical brain to tell you, which target to take first, where to do it, how to do it, it's that. And I guess that would be the paradox in our game, is we have to have the analytical brain to analyze the shot. But the thing is, the analytical brain brings with it is fear.
You have to set the plan. But once you've set the plan, you have to step back and say, okay, team, go at it. We've got the plan.
Yeah, let's do it. And that's where the immediate correction, whether don't worry about where I had it wrong, be decisive, and let's get on with it, which allows you, what you're talking about, these small errors to occur, and the more you're decisive about it and you let it happen, the quicker you get to where you want to be, right?
That's correct. And the next time you face a similar presentation, the faster you learn it. That's what showed up in their research. If you could get them to do that, and you showed them something in the future that looked like what the baseline training was, they picked up that new sequence much faster.
So back to the beginner, got to get their gun mount down for sure. I mean, almost everybody that talked last month said, learn to mount the gun, learn to mount the gun, learn to mount the gun. What we constantly see is people want to get the gun involved with the target way too early.
Absolutely.
And that's that's not letting your eyes do the job they have to do.
Exactly, but they want to get that damn gun involved with that target. It's like, a first date. They want to get the gun and the bird together.
They're jammed then.
Yeah, I mean, and like Bob said, when the gun and the bird are together, the eyes can't do their job, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a few minutes. Okay, all right. And how did all that have to do with choking, Bob?
Well, it actually came out of, we don't understand what really goes on and how people learn motor movement. Now they're going to go back, and what they've got some interesting information that popped up in the process. One of the things that has been known about in research is that when you remove people from the baseline task and give them something new, the brain seems to I'm going to use the word disengage, which is what they used. What was described before was people forgot how to do the baseline eventually. Turns out that's not what happens. You never forget completely. What you do is you reduce the brain's activity down to a lower level, and it varied all over the place, to something, I'm going to say 25 to 50% perfection when you were reintroduced to the same exercise down the line after you'd done a bunch of other things. And what they said was, basically, realistically, if you present a new problem, the brain has to disengage from the immediacy of what it was doing before to be able to even apply what it learned to the new task. What's fascinating is that when this disengagement shows up, varies a lot within the population of people that they researched, and they have only done a couple hundred, so that we're not talking about knowing the whole population at large. But what they found is that the degree of disengagement varied a lot, and how many trials it took on the new task before the disengagement really cut in and you could show that disengagement occurring was very variable. Sometimes it took 20 trials on the new test. Sometimes it took 100 trials on the new test.
All right, now explain that to us in terms of going from a left to right crosser to a right to left quartering bird. If the new task was the right to left quartering bird, and the old task was the left to right crossing bird, what would we have to do in the disengaging process to go from the crossing bird to the quartering bird?
Your best bet is to take them in increments, so there's something in the baseline that they can slowly transfer over. So if you switch from the crosser to the quartering in a sudden change, you're going to find a lot of people who just they won't make that transition very well. They'll give it way too much forward allowance because they can't disengage. But we don't yet know why this is the case. But when you see it, the answer is if you go, wow, no matter what I do in working with them, they're still just way out in front of the quartering bird now, but they were doing great on the crossing bird. Fine, go back and take that crossing bird back in increments. So make it a crossing bird, then a barely quartering bird, and a little more quartering bird, and bring them into it. You've done that. I've seen you do it. But that's the way you're going to have to take those people who can't seem to disengage from the previous task.
So when you say they're not able to disengage, another way to say that is they keep applying what they did on the last target to the next target.
Correct.
As opposed to looking at the target as completely different.
Correct. Even though the problem is new, they're applying the old information. But as I said, there's a lot of variation in the population that they were able to study, which they are very curious about because they don't understand it either.
Well, I'm glad to see that I'm not alone. Okay. Now, I have to tell you that I concur. That some shooters, and I will tell you this, when you get into the intermediate level shooters, the upper intermediate level shooters, they can switch from one target to another and oftentimes apply the same merging fundamental on a crosser and a quartering bird. They can apply that really well, but as beginners, they have a hard time understanding how to go from crossing to quartering.
Yep.
And like you say, you're better off starting with a crossing bird and then moving to the left, and the more you move to the left and get closer to the machine, the more it becomes a quartering bird, and it seems for some reason easier for them to get in sync with that bird that way.
The attrition effect here over time is beneficial to them in both ways. So what they noticed was eventually you can do it fairly quickly. Once that disengagement process has really gone in, then you can switch people around pretty easily. Yeah. And again, back to that, what happens with the error correction? They learn the next task faster and faster as you go down the line.
Interesting. It's a fascinating study to watch people's brains struggle and succeed. It really is a fascinating study. I learned quite a bit this last weekend working with several shooters that were struggling about what they were struggling about. And if we have time, we'll get to that. If not, we'll talk about it next time. But anyway, all right. Thank you, Bob.
Welcome.
You're going to continue with that research, I think. And,
yes, I am.
Every time something comes out, we need to talk about it and make sure that we make it available to everybody. And as we say almost every time we get together with people, quit trying to break the target, just make the move and let us mold the move. That's the big thing. Last month we talked about what the beginning shooters needed to do in order to optimize their advancement into intermediate and advanced shooters. Some of the things that came up last month were there are no shortcuts, who to go to when you need help, learn to trust yourself. Dennis Manuel sent me a little synopsis. One of the things that he said was don't tie your ego or self-esteem to your results, meaning your misses. I think that was echoed quite well by Max McCard, who sent me an epistle the next day. Find good instruction and learn a shooting system. Not necessarily the top shooter, driver, swimmer, pole vaulter, or fisherman. Someone with experience in instructing, and then learn to trust the system. Dennis emphasized more and more how you need to learn to move and mount the gun, see the target, learn to see the target, be in tempo, of course, break point, hold point, and focal point, and looking at misses as an opportunity to learn. Anybody that's on the line that wasn't here last time or that was here last time, anybody else have anything else that they would like to bring to the forefront that maybe when you were a beginner you wished you had learned better? Rick, anything in your mind that stands out for as far as a beginning shooter? Jeff, throw something in here. What we're finding is that we need to spend a lot more time being more specific with what beginners need to do on our knowledge vault. We're putting together a beginner section and scripting it now, and going to do the same thing with intermediate and advanced. But there's so many things that beginners need to learn, and there's a lot of mistakes that beginners make in that they think that there's a shortcut, but there are no shortcuts. I think Shane talked about that last month. Rick, anything come to your mind that possibly you wished you had learned better as a beginner, something you maybe had to go back and relearn as an intermediate or advanced shooter that you probably should have learned as a beginner?
Well, it's for me, it was rudimentary. I would say keep a log. I wished I'd have kept the log sooner so I wasn't out there just blowing shells up all day long. I wish I'd have said, maybe Vicky's right. Maybe I should have kept the log.
Well, would you repeat that one more time? Wait, would you just repeat? She just had a birthday. Would you repeat that one more time?
I'd like to say happy birthday that Vicky was right.
Thank you.
It sounds so basic, but I wished I had listened and said, yeah, I should have kept the log because it would have saved a lot of money. It would have saved a lot of time. I found myself shooting my favorite shots over and over. And as a beginner, if I had kept the log right away, I would have said, this weekend I'm going to shoot these targets. I'm going to shoot those targets. And I'm just going to shoot those targets, and I'm going to go home, rather than get carried away with the excitement of this new sport that I was learning. And give me another box, and shoot 25 rabbits. Shoot 25 rabbits here and 25 there without any rhyme or reason. So, number one, if you're starting in this sport, get with Vicky or Gil and show them, or just go into one of their books. They've got a great log template that you can use. Yeah. And you can also hybrid from that. You can make your own. Gil told me that I could take some of the ideas that they've had in their template, and he said it's just a template. Write as much as you want or as little as you want. And I think the other thing when it comes to shooting the targets, physically shooting the targets, I wished I'd have paid more attention to what was meant by sliding the eyes to the front edge and focusing hard on the target. I didn't give that much credence, but holy cow, it makes the biggest difference. Learn to see the target correctly. And here's the thing. Even if you've got to go to the ski field, what I did after I got hip to this about seeing this target clearly was I went down to the ski field and I sat on the bench and I watched squad after squad after squad throw targets. I didn't pay a dime, and I simply watched their targets from the bench about 25 yards away and practiced focusing on the front edge as the birds were coming out of the low and the high house. So I think other people might like to chime in, but for me, those were the two things. And learn to mount that gun. Learn to mount the gun. Get that gun out of your shoulder.
Yeah, that's just...
This is Dennis. If I could add just a little bit about the log book. When I first started in, the log book and the pattern sign up, man, what is all this information for? But any student beginning out should start a log book and just whatever they think is important, start there. Start there.
Write it down.
And in time, you'll start adding more. Because the more you know, the more you realize you need to keep track of what you're doing. That's the only way you know where you come from.
Wow.
And the only way you know where you're going.
The mystery's in the history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Gil and Vicki, you both know this, but if you're shooting international trap or international skeet in the junior portion and you show up without a logbook, they send you home.
Well, there have been quite a few times I've wanted to send some of you home, but since you're paying it, I didn't. I hope you'll forgive me, and there are no discounts, Dennis.
That's right.
Well, Rick mentioned that to me in an email, and Dennis also mentioned that to me about keeping a log, and I think that based on what we have had to go through, that's probably the hardest thing to get anybody to do, is to keep a log. Because in the beginning, they're trying to be right. They're trying to write down the right things as opposed to just write something down.
Exactly.
And it like Dennis said, if you just start writing something, you don't have to write a lot. Just write something down. You'll find that you're a creature of habit, and you'll find that certain patterns will emerge, and it's a roadmap to where you've been, and like Dennis said, you can't know where you're going until you know where you are and where you've been. So I think that's good. Go ahead.
Rick here. I'd also like to add, too, that, for example, if you say in your log, today I smoked rabbits. Today I was excellent on rabbits. Next time you go out, you look at your log and it said, last session I was great on rabbits. I'm going to shoot a few just to stay sharp. And you enter that in your log. Well, today I was great on rabbits. Today I was great on rabbits. My point being, all of a sudden your mind starts to believe, hey, I'm great on rabbits, and it starts to become reality.
Yep.
Yeah. It keeps you from remembering only the bad, which we are all guilty of. It brings the good to the forefront.
You don't want to write that negativity in the log. You want to keep that on a positive note if you can.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I just need to work a little bit harder on this the next time, Anything else? Anybody else? Things that beginners should really pay attention to.
I'll just throw out, I tend to agree with everything everybody said so far. I'll just throw out one more thing, right? No one rolls over and goes into the NFL as a starting quarterback just because the day before they said, I want to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. If you ask those guys, they wanted to do it for a long time. So from an ego perspective, be aware of what your limitations are when you start, and don't be despondent. Don't let your ego push you because you don't have success early on, right? All the things you talk about work when people are patient and when they understand, that this is a learning process and it has to happen over time. All the times I see people forget to do those things, it's because they're impatient. It's because they're being driven by a need to be successful immediately, and that's just not going to happen. I mean, it might happen 1 in 1,000 people, but for most, you have to learn. You have to build these skills over time, and that's really important.
Gil, can I add to that?
Sure.
I deal with a lot of youth, and one of the biggest problems we have with our youth is the parents. They have unreal expectations and think they ought to be the quarterback right now, and really don't even know how to shoot. So I mean, and that puts some added pressure on some of these kids when they're trying to first start off. So I really have to spend a lot of time with the parents to tell them to back off and leave them alone. They'll come around and don't expect anything. And I said, most of the time, we're for a 3 years to 5 year ride before they're really going to be really up there. So I said, so you don't know what to expect. So just let them have fun, and they'll get it. It just takes time. But the other thing that I notice with a lot of young shooters and stuff is when you start telling them you need to be outside the circle, most of the time they don't understand what in the hell you talk about. So I really have to get down and and I have a whiteboard, and I'll have to draw them out the picture, and then I get them to draw the picture themselves on the board, so they'll understand what's going on here, and it tends to work out. The same thing with dealing with quartering. Most of them don't see a quartering target; they still see the crossing target. So even if you start them on quartering targets, they still see the crossing targets as they did the quartering targets. So it by letting them see it on paper or on a board, they begin to understand what's beginning to happen. So it makes it a much better transition for them to understand what they're shooting at, and they go after it much easier.
Be patient. Shane, are you out there? Shane not able to be with us tonight. Shane told me a story of a friend of his whose son had won a couple of roping contests there in Midland. And all of a sudden they went to Oklahoma City to the big show. And you all know what happened to that kid from a small town who'd been in a couple of competitions with 10 or 15 people in it. When he got to the big show,
yeah,
he just fell flat on his face.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't ready.
Shane was talking to his dad, and the subject came up, and he just choked. He fell flat on his face. He said, I looked at him and I said, what happened to you? And Shane said, you need to sit down. I need to talk to you about something. So the guy sat down and he said, what you don't understand is he did the best he could. But it was the first time he'd ever faced performing in that arena. And he's going to have to go to that arena and perform and fail 10 to 15 times before he understands and learns to compete at that level in that arena. And what you told him, or when you said, what the heck happened to you? You fell on your butt. You're not doing him any good. You're sentencing him to the hot box. You're telling him he's not worth anything. You're telling him he choked. You're telling him he's not any good. You don't understand what it takes to get to the point to where you can perform at high levels. It takes failing many times over and over again in the arena you want to perform in, to where you learn how to perform. You learn the pitfalls. You learn about doubt. You learn about fear. And you learn what they do to you. And you learn what hoping to win does to you. And you learn what knowing where you are and what you got to do does to you. You learn, if you're going to win, what you got to do is go in and work on process. You can't worry about outcome. You got to go in there and you say, I'm going to do it this way, and I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to get up and do it again. And I'm going to keep doing that until somebody tells me I'm through or I've won. I'm going to keep doing that. I'm going to keep getting back up. And he said, man, I've never heard anything like that, but it makes so much sense. And Shane said, as soon as you get ready to make that decision and as soon as your son gets ready to make that decision, I happen to know some people, they couldn't rope a chair sitting still in the living room, but they can damn sure help him learn how to compete mentally. And when you're ready, I'll turn you on to him. But you need to go and have a talk with your son. I think evaluating, like Shane was talking about with his father, evaluating how you perform, because you know as a beginner they're going to want to go shoot tournaments. I think evaluating how you perform as a learning situation as opposed to, like Dennis said in his note to me, a statement of your self-worth. Let me see, just a minute. Dennis, if you don't mind me quoting, I'm going to quote from your letter to me. Learning to separate your personal value or self-esteem from your missed targets. Learning that missed targets are an opportunity to learn and improve. I came the closest to quitting this sport before I learned these two valuable lessons. And you know every beginner, because of what Rick said, Rick hit it right on the head. I'm sorry, Jeff hit it right on the head. They think that once they learn how to break one target that they should be able to apply that to everything. It's a long, cold, hard journey.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a journey of self-evaluation and self-improvement. And it's like Doss Bourgeois said at the advanced school last year. We were all talking about it in the conference room over there at the 74 Ranch. They were talking about commitment. They were talking about getting good, and they were talking about being the best. And Doss's eye caught mine, and we just kind of looked at each other, smiled, and everybody got through talking about it. And I looked at him and I said, Doss, sometimes it's a real lonely road to get good, isn't it? And he said, yes, sir. Most of the time, it's a real lonely road because you've got to look to within yourself to get better. You can come to Gil and Vicki and Brian and Bob. You can come to us that have an experience teaching people how to shoot and teaching people how to perform. But sooner or later, the helping hand you're looking for is at the end of your own arm. And it's you. It's like Rick said, keeping that log. It's like Dennis said, keeping that log. It's like Jeff said. It ain't going to be easy. It only, you go from winning the club championship to winning the U.S. Open only in your dreams and in fairy tales. It doesn't happen that way. And we've talked so many times on this coaching hour, and Brian's right. It's the parents that need to be coached. The parents have to realize that just because they run a 25 on trap in practice doesn't mean little Johnny or little Susie's going to run 25 straight every time they shoot, because when there's 87 people watching and they know they're straight going to peg 4 and they started on peg 1, peg 4 is not the same as it was when they were picking their nose and just shooting for fun at the club last time. When they go to peg 4 on trap, they know they got 10 more for 25 straight. They know. And you can't not know in that game. You know. So ultimately it ends up being, how many times have you been there knowing and been able to put that thought behind you and concentrate on process and get the job done? I had a fella come over that works with the 4-H. His name was Bill. He came over and he's a great shot, always been a great shot. We showed him some things that he didn't realize, and he was pretty impressed with them. And I was talking to him about his 4-H shooters, and he said, yeah, I had a kid out there one time that just, he just started missing everywhere. And what I did is I just took him up behind the trap house, and I put him about 5 steps behind the trap house, and I locked it down on the straightaway, and I just had him just keep shooting. Boom, pull, boom, until he started smoking targets, and just rebooted his computer, and he went right back to Station 4, and he started hitting everything again. And I said, well, that was more an ego trip for you than helping him. And he looked at me, and he said, what are you talking about? I said, well, the next time he's in a match and he's straight going to Station 4 and he misses the first shot, can he call King's X and go up behind the trap house and shoot 30 shots going straight away with it locked down at 12 o'clock so he can get his groove back and then go back and start competing again? You haven't taught him how to come back from a miss. You made it an ego trip about you because you were able to get him to hit the target again, but you didn't teach him anything about how to compete and how to come back from a miss under competition.
I would argue he did damage.
There's no doubt in my mind, but I didn't want to come and hit him that hard with it. You and I both know he did damage. He didn't teach that kid, number one, how to analyze a miss, and number two, how to stay mentally tough and focused on. It's not what you did on the last one. That one's gone. What are you going to do on the next one? Go back to process. Hold point, focal point, soft focus, soft hands, hard focus, pull, boom. See the bird, shoot the bird. But that's what Brian's talking about the parents. I mean, and this guy's heavy involved with 4-H. I mean, he's real heavy involved with them, and we're going to be there. We're going to help them with their big 4-H shoot at San Antonio this year, and be there for 4 days and show the kids the animations and talk to them about performance and whatnot. But he said, I just rebooted his computer. I said, yeah, but you didn't help him. When I got through explaining it to him, he began to realize that these are his words, not mine. Coaching has something more to do than just getting them hit the target, isn't it? I said, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Hitting the target is the result of good coaching. It's not the objective of good coaching.
So, Gil, getting back to your new learner, you just pointed out one of the things that I think we all would agree is critically important is learning to let what you just did go and move on, because the next one is what counts.
Yeah. Never be defined by your last shot. Always be defined by your next shot, your next performance. Doesn't matter what it is. I've said this on this coaching hour many times. I go back to John Elway. It didn't matter what the score was or how much time was left. He always had a smile on his face. And I read a commentary one time where they were down by 4 points with 1 minute and 25 seconds to go on their 18-yard line. And he went into the huddle. He looked at everybody in the huddle and said, okay, guys, we got them right where we want them. Now let's go get them. And that's leadership. It's not foolish optimism. It's not self-deception. It's self-direction. And I have to tell you, as great as that guy is, or was as a quarterback, when he said that, he believed it. He actually believed that they had them right where they wanted them. They had the ball. They had 1 minute 25, all their timeouts. On the 18, on their 18, we got them right where we want them. We've done it so many times. All we got to do is do it again because we've done it before. Now let's get down to business. Do your job. Don't wish we were on their 18. We're on ours. Do your job. And you know, Brian, that's one of the things that I'm not looking forward to about working with kids is having to deal with their parents, because you never know. You know, you never know what they have to go home to.
Well, you got to start them. You got to start them when the first kids come up to the field. It's you let the kids go off in one place, and you bring the parents to another place, and you sit down and kind of give them the parameters of what's going to they need to do. And there are some of them there will do it, and there'll be one or two that are not going to do it. They think they know what to do. So that's something you can't control. So and then you go put the work on the kids and let them go. I mean, because like I say, you can't control what happens at the house. So.
Yeah. And Jeff, I agree with you. I think he probably did more harm than good. Because and he understood that. Once I made the comment, and he's not a coach, but he's a shooter. And his anecdote would just get the guy to see the target blow up several times. The problem was the kid was looking at the gun. And he made him shoot targets so fast that he didn't have time to look at the gun. and he quote rebooted his computer, and he shot better when he got back to the station. But he realized at that point in time that was not the best of things to do for him. Was he successful? Yeah. But it wasn't. It didn't help the kid at all. And in many ways, like you said, it could prove detrimental to the kid because their egos are so fragile at that time. They tie their self-worth to their result, and they're more afraid to fail than they are excited to succeed. And you really have to, you really have to teach them by example because they don't understand reasoning. They don't understand the reasoning word. You have to teach them by example. And many times I've told a lot of coaches that we work with, you need to go up there and miss a few. It's okay. You need to show them that it's okay to miss. And believe it or not, there are many times where I've intentionally missed targets in front of classes, just so they'll see what I do when I miss. However, it has been very gratifying when I missed one after the second day and somebody said, "Damn, finally he missed one, he's human." Okay.
The ego is an interesting thing. I mean, especially for kids who aren't development in their overall development aren't as far along. You know, we do the STTP shoots here every year. We trap for them, and so I get to see all the kids as they come by, and some of them are vibrating like a leaf. You know, they get up in the stand, you can see the parents behind them, and it's the same thing I used to experience when I umpired softball and baseball. The parents, I wanted to go up in the stands and strangle some of the parents. I had to stop doing it because, it was crazy. You know, and umpires, they don't have a great life anyway. And having the parents, I mean, you know, just the level of pressure to put on a kid, and they're different, right? Ego-wise, I think I told Gil a while ago that you know, I would put a lot of pressure on myself when I first started going to tournaments because I wanted to perform well, and I'd look and I'd see my name at the bottom of a scoreboard, you know, at the bottom of a class, and I think, you know, everybody who looks at that's going to think I'm an idiot and I suck. And after a while, you start to realize that, you know what? Nobody does that. You might see somebody walk by, they might say, "Oh, that day," and that's all they think about it. And the people who do think that you suck because they saw your name at the bottom of the scoreboard, do you really care what they think about you anyway?
No.
Right? I mean, no. But translate that to kids. I mean, the parents are looking at that, right? You're living that through your kid. If your kid doesn't perform well, you're going to put more pressure on them because you know that's natural. You want your kid to perform well, and it's ugly, and it's hard to manage.
It's a shame with all the cameras that we can't get the parents to bring them out and say, "This is what it looked like when you were learning how to ride a bicycle or learning how to walk. You fell on your face, you fell on your side, you fell everywhere, and you got up and you smiled and got back on and did it again." Yeah. And
yep.
With all the photographic stuff these days, I'm sure they have those on record someplace.
I am going to have Shane, in his own unique way, describe what he talked, how he talked to that fellow, because I think that's something that I could play that back and make it available for you, Brian, to play back to your parents, which would, at the beginning of the year, it would give you a platform of logic to show them that it's a progressive thing. You got to do it. You got to do it, and just because you've done it once doesn't mean you can do it again. You have to do it over and over again, and you have to keep getting up, and you have to fail and fail better and fail better until finally one day you learn how to compete. And once you compete in this arena, when you go to the national arena, you got to go to the national arena and fail enough times before you learn how to compete at that level. So it's not about just being able to do it. It's how many times have you been there and failed and gotten up and learned from it and come back and gotten better and better and better. I think I'm going to do that between now and when we get together again next week. Well, I didn't get to talk to you about a couple of things I wanted to talk about, but this has been a very productive hour. Next month, we're going to talk about intermediate shooters. I'll see if I can't send you a little outline of what we think intermediate shooters need to learn. and I would appreciate it if you would go through it, look at it, make some notes so that we can have a couple of coaching hours on intermediate shooters. And then beginning in March, we'll start talking about advanced shooters because I want to have a 6 coaching hour series on beginner, intermediate, and advanced shooters and what they have to learn to be able to compete and move on to the next level. So that said,
one other thing you need. You need how to deal with a slump.
Oh, we'll be talking about that at the next level for sure.
Okay.
No doubt about that, and I'm gonna count on you to bring that up. Okay.
Okay.
All right, I'm ready for it. I've already got a lot written on that. So, all right, so guys, from me and Vicki, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. We'll see you next year, and thank you for your loyalty on the Coaching Hour and the Knowledge Vault. And be safe in the holiday. Have some Christmas cheer.
Merry
Christmas. Talk to you next year.
Merry Christmas.
Good night.
Merry Christmas.
Bye.
Merry Christmas.
Bye, buddy. Bye. Thanks.